אז כשדיברנו והתכוננו לשיחה הזאת, inside out, על מצוות לשב בסוכה, והרעיון היה מתוך השיחה ביני ובין הרב טרייסטר, על הנושא של הארעיות של הסוכה, הזמניות שלה, ומה המשמעות של זה, במיוחד לימינו, ומאיפה מגיע הרעיון הזה של לשב בסוכה, מה הוא אמור לסמל עבורנו. אני הלכתי לכיוון יותר מדרשי, ואתם תראו בהמשך, הרב טרייסטר שילמד באנגלית, אז הוא הלך לכיוון היותר הלכתי של המשניות, אז נקבל ככה שתי זוויות היום. נתחיל קודם כל מהתנ"ך, מספר ויקרא כף ג', אתם רואים כל דבר יש גם באנגלית, בצד שמאל, you could see the English on the left side. בספר ויקרא כף ג' מופיעה המצווה של סוכות, אך ב-15 יום לחודש השביעי, באוספכם את תבואת הארץ, תחוגו את חג אדוני 7 ימים, ביום הראשון שבתון וביום השמיני שבתון, כן, אז צריך לחגוג איזשהו חג באמצע חודש תשרי, לא מצוין לנו עדיין איזה חג, ולקחתם לכם ביום הראשון פרי עץ הדר, כפות תמרים וענף עץ אבות וערבי נחל, פה חז"ל למדו אחרי זה שאלו הם 4 המינים, ושמחתם לפני אדוני אלוהיכם 7 ימים. מה שצריך לעשות זה להיות, don't worry, be happy. צריך רק להיות שמח 7 ימים, וחגותם אותו חג לאדוני 7 ימים בשנה, חוקת עולם לדורותיכם, בחודש השביעי תחוגו אותו. Okay, אז זה חג שצריך לעשות לדורות, זה לא רק פעם אחת. ואז מוסיף התנ"ך, בסוכות תשבו 7 ימים, כל האזרח בישראל ישבו בסוכות, למען ידעו דורותיכם, כי בסוכות הושבתי את בני ישראל בהוציאי אותם מארץ מצרים, אני אדוני אלוהיכם. אז יש פה עוד מצווה, חוץ מ4 המינים וחוץ מהמצווה לשמוח, לשבת בסוכות, כל אחד מישראל, לא רק גברים, זה לא נראה כאילו זה רק גברים, לא רק בני ישראל, אלא כנראה גם גרים, כל אחד צריך לשבת בסוכה. למה? כדי ללמד למען ידעו דורותיכם, כן, זה מזכיר לנו את יציאת מצרים, כי בסוכות הושבתי את בני ישראל בארץ מצרים. זאת אומרת, אנחנו רואים שיש לנו פה מצווה עם איזושהי סיבה מאוד, מאוד ברורה. זה כמו זכר ליציאת מצרים שאנחנו אומרים, נכון? הרבה פעמים אנחנו אומרים בקידוש, בכל מיני מצוות אחרות, זה זכר ליציאת מצרים. אוקיי? מי ששואל, מי שנכנס רק עכשיו, אנחנו עושים הקדמה קצרה בעברית, ואחרי זה הרב טרייסטר ילמד באנגלית. עכשיו, בספר נחמיה, שזה סוף התורה, אנחנו מוצאים עוד פעם משהו על סוכות. ספר נחמיה מספר לנו על עזרא ונחמיה שמגיעים מבבל, אחרי חורבן בית המקדש, לא היה אף אחד בארץ והם עלו לארץ, כן, קצת כמו החלוצים בימינו, והם מקימים את בית המקדש, והם מתחילים לקרוא בתורה לעם ישראל. משהו שלא עשו הרבה מאוד שנים, לא קראו בתורה, פתאום עזרא קורא בתורה לכולם, וימצאו כתוב בתורה אשר ציווה אדוני ביד משה, אשר ישבו בני ישראל בסוכות בחג בחודש השביעי. וואו, פתאום מוצאים בספר התורה משהו מאוד מעניין, מצוות סוכות. רגע, מה קרה כשהייתם בבבל, לא חגגתם סוכות, אבות אבותיכם לא חגגו אף פעם סוכות? זה מאוד מוזר, מה זה פתאום הם מוצאים את זה בתורה? ומה קורה הלאה? ואשר ישמיעו ויעבירו קול בכל עריהם ובירושלים לאמור, צאו ההר והביאו עלי זית ועלי עץ שמן ועלי הדס ועלי תמרים ועלי עץ אבות, לעשות סוכות ככתוב. אז הם אומרים עכשיו אחד לשני, כן, תלכו להרים, תביאו את כל החומרים האלה, חלק מהם זה מארבעת המינים, אבל לא בשביל לעשות את מצוות ארבעת המינים, אלא בשביל לעשות סוכות ככתוב, כמו שכתוב בתורה. ואכן כך קורה, ויצאו העם ויביאו ויעשו להם סוכות איש על גגו, ובחצרותיהם ובחצרות בית האלוהים, וברחוב שער המים וברחוב שער אפרים, זה השערים של בית המקדש, כמו שהיום יש לנו שער יפו, שער שכם, שער האשפות, אז גם אז לבית המקדש היו כל מיני שערים. ויעשו כל הקהל השבים מן השבי, כל בני ישראל ששבים מהגלות, סוכות, וישבו בסוכות, כי לא עשו מימי ישוע בן נון, כן בני ישראל עד היום ההוא, ותהי שמחה גדולה מאוד. כן, אז לא רק שבבבל לא עשו סוכות, גם בתקופת המלכים לא עשו סוכות. לפי זה אפילו דוד המלך ושלמה המלך לא עשו סוכות. כולם שכחו את המצווה הזאת. מי כן עשה? בתקופת יהושע בן נון, לפי הדבר הזה, שזה דבר מאוד מעניין ומאוד מוזר. דרך אגב, זה גם כתוב לנו לגבי עוד מצוות כמו פסח, שגם לא עשו פסח הרבה מאוד שנים. ועכשיו אנחנו מנסים להבין את המהות הזאת של הסוכה, נסתכל בשמות י"ב, כתוב, ויסעו בני ישראל מרעמסס סוכותה, כ-600,000 רגלי הגברים לבד מטף. כן, אז על פי פשט הדברים, בני ישראל היו במצרים, הם נסעו מרעמסס במצרים, למקום הראשון שהם נסעו אליו זה סוכותה. אוקיי? זה נשמע כאילו זה שם של מקום. במדרש, מחילתא דרבי ישמעאל, כתוב סוכותה, סוכות ממש. דכתיב ויעקב נשא סוכותה, דברי רבי אליעזר. זאת אומרת, רבי אליעזר אומר, כשכתוב סוכותה, מדובר על סוכותה. זה שם של מקום. והחכמים אומרים, סליחה, לא, אני התבלבלתי. רבי אליעזר אומר, לא, זה לא מקום, זה סוכות. כן, זאת אומרת, הם בנו סוכות. חכמים אומרים, אין סוכות אלא מקום שנאמר, ויסעו מסוכות ויחנו באיתה מקום, אף סוכות מקום. זאת אומרת, יש לנו פה מחלוקת בין חכמים שאומרים, הם אלה שאומרים שסוכות זה שם של מקום, שזה נשמע כמו הפשט, לעומת רבי אליעזר שאומר, לא, מדובר פה על סוכות, שבני ישראל בנו סוכות. רבי עקיבא אומר, אין סוכות אלא ענני כבוד. אוקיי? Clouds of glory. אני מאוד אוהב את הביטוי הזה, ענני כבוד, באנגלית זה אפילו נשמע עוד יותר יפה, Clouds of glory. והשאלה היא, מה הם ענני הכבוד האלה? בתרגום יונתן על הפסוק שקראנו, על שמות י"ב, פסוק 37, כתוב ככה, ואני דווקא אקרא באנגלית, כי זה בארמית, אז אני יכול לקרוא או תרגום בעברית או תרגום באנגלית, אז אני אקרא את האנגלית. And the sons of Israel moved forth from Pilusin, Pilusin זה רעמסס, towards Sukkot, 130,000, protected there by 7 clouds of glory on their 4 sides. One above them, כן, אז יש להם 7 ענני כבוד. מה זה ענני הכבוד שרבי עקיבא דיבר עליהם מקודם? 4 זה הקופסה הזאת שהיא הסוכה. זה ענן מכל צד, ענן למעלה, למטה, כן, כל הצדדים, כמו בית. One above them, עוד אחד מעל הסוכה הזאת של 4 קירות, that neither hail nor rain might fall upon them, nor that they should be burned by the heat of the sun. One beneath them, עוד אחד שזה היה רצפה, that they might not be hurt by thorns, serpents, or scorpions, and one went before them to make the valleys even and the mountains low, and to prepare them a place of habitation. כן, זאת אומרת, יש לנו פה ענני כבוד, clouds of glory, שמגנים על עם ישראל מכל הצדדים, וגם מלמטה, גם מלמטה, ואפילו מלפנים כדי לפלס להם את הדרך. דווקא במדבר, דווקא במקום שהם הכי פגיעים, הכי מרגישים את הקור והנחשים והעקרבים, והכי מסוכן שם, דווקא שם אלוהים נותן להם את ההגנה הזאת, אבל זו הגנה וירטואלית בהרבה מאוד מובנים, כי זה עננים. ענן זה גם משהו שיכול להתפזר. אז אני חושב שזה יותר מדבר פה על סוג של תחושה. איזה מין תחושה אתה צריך להיות כשאתה נמצא בתוך סוכה. בתקופה הזאת של המגפה, של הקורונה, שאולי אנחנו מרגישים יותר בטוח בבית, אבל דווקא אולי המומחים אומרים לנו שאולי באוויר הפתוח זה אולי יותר בטוח, כל השאלה הזאת של מה בטוח, מה פחות, מאוד מתערערת, והתחושה הזאת של ענני כבוד, של איזשהו משהו שהוא גדול יותר מאיתנו, שהוא מוביל אותנו, יכולה להיות דרך אחת כדי להתמודד עם התקופה הקשה הזאת, התחושה שגם אם אנחנו בחוץ, גם אם אנחנו בסוכה, במדבר, לא מוגנים וכולי, יש לנו איזושהי הגנה של ענני כבוד שמלווים אותנו לאורך כל הדרך. אז בזה אני מסיים, ואני ממש שמח להזמין את I'm happy, Rabbi Treister, שאתה מוכן ללמד, ואתה יש לך גם מקורות, נכון? לשתף.
Okay. Most Ramanim Bangvi, thank you. Yes, thank you. These are the basic sources as you saw. I want to get into something a little more focused about this holiday. But first, before I begin, which I've already done, but before I begin, I need to tell you that my capabilities with this system are somewhat nil. And so you're going to have to bear with me as I try and figure out how all of this works and how we proceed. Let me go start off with, let me see if I can get this up. Yeah, okay, here we go. I'm presenting you with material from the Tanakh that deals specifically with the three pilgrimage festivals. You know, the Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. The reference that Tzvi gave you about Sukkot with the Sukkah that's the only place that shows up in the entire Tanakh. Otherwise, the holiday, as you will see, is described essentially as a harvest festival. So I've got put up here the references to three festivals, and there's something unique about two of them and something unique about the third. If you read through what it says about the holiday of Pesach, something special has to happen on that holiday, okay? So I'll read this to you. Can you see the text? Okay with the text? Nod up and down vigorously. Turn off your microphone and I'll say yes. Yes, good, thank you, okay. So here's what it says about Pesach. It says, remember this day in which you went forth from Egypt, the house of bondage. The Lord freed you with a mighty hand. No unleavened bread shall be eaten. Okay, so we've got a historical event connected to the issue of not eating chametz. Throughout the 7 days, unleavened bread shall be eaten. And then it says, and you shall explain to your son, and that day is because of what the Lord did for me when I went out from Egypt. So part of the celebration of the holiday of Pesach is not only not eating chametz, but v'higadata levincha, and that's the major text, of course, the Haggadah, the obligation to tell about the what's going on. If you look at the holiday of Shavuot, the biblical text in Deuteronomy says, I'm not going to read this whole thing for you, but it's a harvest festival. On the holiday, you go up to the temple and you present a basket with the first fruits of your harvest, and then you are obligated to say, Arami Obed Avi, my father was a wandering Aramean, and that's the guts of the Haggadah. But again, you've got a declaration being made on the holiday of Shavuot. Look what happens with Sukkot. After the ingathering from the threshing floor in your vat, so we've got grain harvest and either an olive or a grape harvest or both. You should keep the festival of booth, and it's called Chag Sukkot, for 7 days. All the people in your family, as well as the impoverished and the poor and the stranger. And it says you shall hold a feast for the Lord your God 7 days, and you shall have nothing but joy. The samachta b'ha'ita ach sameach. Now there's a distinction here between what it says about Pesach and Shavuot as opposed to what it says about Sukkot. You see the distinction? Anybody? Okay, good. All right.
There's nothing to say here. There's nothing you have to.
There's nothing to say on Sukkot. The holiday on Shavuot and Pesach, you explain what's going on. What happens on the holiday of Sukkot is you don't explain anything. What you know about the holiday of Sukkot is only what you experience from the holiday of Sukkot. So who's doing the talking? Not you. The holiday of Sukkot is talking. So what we're going to do is look at how the rabbis constructed this holiday so that the holiday of Sukkot should be able to talk to you. And you should be able to hear what the holiday is really trying to say. We together? We good? Not up and down vigorously. Yes, no? Comments? Good, thank you, good. Part 2, I'm getting rid of this, and we're going to take a look at, come back here, please. Number 2. Interesting thing about this piece that Tzvi presented about the holiday of, as celebrated the returnees from the exile, the Babylonian exile. And all of a sudden they discover, my God, we didn't celebrate Sukkot. We didn't celebrate Sukkot. And what did they do for the holiday of Sukkot? What would you expect them to do? Anybody?
Eat.
Eat, well, of course, okay.
Have fun.
Be
happy.
Look what these people do. They go out and they collect myrtles and palms and other leafy trees to make booths, to make Sukkot. There is nothing here about rushing out and getting lulav and etrog and hadas and all that stuff. And in fact, I'm going to make a radical suggestion that the whole chokhmah of the holiday was, in fact, to live in a sukkah, whatever that's supposed to be, and that what we end up with is a remnant of that first holiday celebrated by the returning exiles from Babylonia, coming with myrtle and palms and leafy branches and shaking them. And that's how we end up with the lulav and etrog, something quite distinct and separate from the issue of the sukkah itself. Sidebar. Okay. Any arguments?
Question.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Does it not make sense that they would stay, if they were harvesting, that they might want to guard the crops that they were harvesting? So in practicality, they would have built booths to stay out there. And
it makes a great deal of sense.
The whole shocho having to do with getting rid of, chasing people away, or chasing away animals, or possibly some function, and we've taken it on as some sort of symbolic act.
It could very well be. Remember, of course, this is still a harvest festival, and the Sukkot that talks about the place when they journeyed out of Egypt as a place, and building Sukkot in the desert. One scratches one's head to think about building these things every night and schlepping branches and finding wood sufficient enough to build Sukkot for 40 years in the desert. But that's all. But the issue of building a Sukkot as a harvester's hut, so they don't have to go back to the town every night. It certainly fits the idea of the holiday as a harvest festival. What we don't know precisely is what, in fact, a sukkah is. And so what I want to do is take some text from the Mishnah see if I can pull this up. Excuse me. And see, in fact, what the rabbis do and how they describe this sukkah, and how they design it, and so that the message of the holiday is supposed to come through. So here is the first Mishnah dealing with the sukkah, and the first thing that says, strangely enough, a sukkah taller than 20 cubits is invalid. Now, it doesn't go into describe what a sukkah is, because we know that it's some kind of structure, and it can't be more than 20 cubits. 20 cubits is approximately 30 feet high. Have you seen a sukkah? That's about three-story building. Three-story building. So the question is, but the rabbis ask, pose the question and say, if you've got a sukkah that big, why would it be invalid? What would be the reasoning for making such a sukkah so high and making it invalid? One of the suggestions that is made by the Rabbanim is that one has to be aware that one is sitting under the schach, under the vegetation covering. If you've got a sukkah that's 30 feet high and you walk into it, you're not aware that you've got a roof over your head. And one of the points of the sukkah is that you have to be aware, according to one of the Rabbanim, that you have to be aware of the roof. Another one.
Excuse me, Ed, where did that
Yeah.
come from? From what we read before, there was nothing about that. This is just
That's right. This is now comes from the discussion in the Talmud itself, where they ask the question, why did the Rabbanim say it's invalid? And so one rabbi says, it is too high for one to be aware of the schach itself.
But the
Another one
schach is
suggests,
what I'm talking about. Why do you have to see the sky? It didn't come from the last, what we just
well,
read.
that's an interesting question. Why do you think you would want to be able to see the roof? What's the point of a roof?
There's
To
a
protect you.
certain-
Exactly, for protection, right? And one of the messages then of the sukkah is that the sukkah is an expression of protection, why do we want protection? So we're separated away from and not afflicted by the weather, by the elements. Okay, and that's one of the messages of the sukkah.
There's a certain cozy feeling in a.
Well, we're going to get
in a
there. We're going to
sukkah.
get there. Okay. Yeah, but clearly having the roof over your head provides a certain sense of, it's like an umbrella in a sense. That gives you a sense of protection and coziness. Probably a good way of describing it. One of the rabbis, Rab Zera, says that if it's so high, if the sukkah walls are so high, the shade would come from the walls. So already you have a sense that the roof is supposed to not only protect you from the rain, but also protect you from the beating sun. And so you need to have some sunlight in the sukkah, according to Zera, but the roof has to provide sufficient coverage to give you more shade than sun. And if you're using the walls, then you're not denigrating, but you're not using the taking advantage of the schach, the greenery on top of the roof, which is the device that is to provide the shade. The third rabbi suggests that the reason it should not be so high is because to be so high, it needs to be stable. So what he's suggesting is beyond 20 cubits, it's a very stable and secure structure. What is he suggesting to us? We need a structure that is not going to be stable, that the very nature of the sukkah has to be that it is frail, that is wobbly, that it's not secure. And the question then is, why would we want to go into a structure that is frail, that is subject to the elements, the wind blowing, they could knock it down, go into a structure that has a roof that provides more shade than sun, okay? And it has to be from the roof and not from the sides. And that means that it's also going to, you ready for this? The roof is going to leak. So what is the point of this building? Why are we told to go into a structure that is frail, that is going to leak, and it's going to provide some sun, but it's going to provide some mostly protection because of the schach on top of it. So I'll leave that to you for a minute and go on to another issue, and that is, yeah.
Could you comment on the Sukkah, which occurs at the end of Yom Kippur and Yonah, and the holiday coming of Sukkot?
It's an interesting question. It's an interesting question, and I can't. I'm not, you're suggesting there is a connection, and perhaps we can discuss, in fact, the connection as we get into discussion later on. I'm going to have to take a pass on that. How big is the sukkah? According to what is considered halacha l'Moshe Sinai, the sukkah has to have a minimum of 3 walls. How big? What's the square footage of the sukkah? Interestingly enough, it goes anywhere from, according to Shammai and Hillel, a discussion of whether or not it's simply large enough for someone to come in and sit down in it and have a meal. So according to Hillel, just for men able to come in and sit down in a chair, no more than 40 inches high. 40 inches high is the minimum height of a sukkah. So you can come into it, sit down, have the schach on the top of it, and you've got yourself a sukkah. Shammai insists, however, that the table has to be in there as well. He wants, and why would Shammai want a table, and why does Hillel say it's not necessary? Because the issue is, this is the place where you sit and you eat. And if you have to lean outside to your table, which is outside your sukkah, then you are now eating outside the sukkah. Bring the table inside the sukkah, so you are fully eating your meal inside the confines of the structure. What it basically is saying is, you don't need this elaborate structure. You could probably use a good refrigerator cardboard box and make yourself a very fine sukkah out of that. And if you were about 10 or 12 years old, you probably did that in any case. It needs 3 walls, a minimum of 3 walls. In fact, the 3rd wall needs to be no bigger than wider than a handbreadth. 4 inches would be sufficient for a sukkah, which means you could probably build it easily, assuming you have a house, easily against the wall of your house. You've already got 1 wall, 2 more walls, 1 standard wall and a 4-inch wall, and you've got schach on top of it, and you're away. Something very simple, but sufficient for the day. In Mishnah number 2 and 3, we're looking for the issue of the sukkah needs to be, cannot be under a tree, and it cannot be inside a house. It needs to be, the roof needs to be exposed to the sun and to the rain. Halacha Mishnah 3 talks about, even if you use a 4-poster bed, that would bring in your bed, a 4-poster bed, into your sukkah, and you put a screening over it, that would invalidate the sukkah because it becomes an interior covering. The schach has to be exposed to the elements. The schach also, according to Mishnah number 1-4, has to be vegetation that is separated from the soil. Now, there's a discussion that goes on about how much of it can be the branches of a tree that is still attached, how much of it can be a vine that grows over the top of the sukkah. The ultimate answer given in the Gemara is that most of it has to be detached from the soil. So you're dealing with stalks of grain. In the old country, we used corn stalks as our schach, with it to provide the sufficient shade for the sukkah. let me go jump down here a little bit further. At the schach in Mishnah number 5, the schach can't be tied together. So you can use, as the returning exiles did, they took bundles of vegetation, tied it together, and used that to form the walls. But for the roof, you have to untie the bundles, which means the schach is separated. Okay. Now there's a message there. Why would you want to insist that the schach on the roof would have to be loose and spread out over the sukkah? What are the consequences of that? And what does that do to your frame of mind when you're sitting in the sukkah and the wind is blowing? Not raining. The wind is blowing. The sun is out, but the wind is blowing.
It's fragile. It's fragile.
Your sukkah is shaking, right? And what's happening to your schach?
It blows off.
So you're constantly doing renovation. You're constantly doing shipputzim to your sukkah in order to maintain it, in order to be able to stay in it. And what does that do to your frame of mind if you're constantly looking up the roof to see whether or not there is more shade than sun or sufficient amount of schach to cover the roof of your sukkah?
Is this not a representation that life is fragile or life is fleeting? And the whole thing being temporary, and to appreciate what we have?
That's an interesting comment. It bears further review. I want to throw out in mission number 11. You see people with something called permanent schach. You know, what we called in Canada snow fencing, but what it's called in this country schach. Basically, reeds all tied together. And the halacha already in the Mishnah says that permanent schach is legitimate, okay? As long as you only use it for schach. If you take it to the beach, and lie on it, it's no longer valid as schach, and you gotta get new schach, new matting like this in order to prepare your sukkah. I'm gonna jump down to this little issue of eating in the sukkah. There are some people who are very punctilious about this and not only eat in the sukkah, but they sleep in the sukkah. Rabbi Eliezer says that a man is obligated to eat 14 meals in the sukkah, one each day and one each night. That was the practice in Mishnah Talmudic times of eating only 2 meals a day rather than our practice of 3. The sages disagree with Rabbi Eliezer, as they consistently do, and say there is no fixed number. The obligation is to eat 1 meal in the sukkah the first night, and the other ones are essentially reshut. But every time you go into the sukkah, and this is an interesting thing, you know, the mitzvah of eating matzah is also only for the first night. And we say, Shechianu, we're eating matzah for the first night, and we don't, and otherwise, the blessing for matzah is amotzi lechem min haaretz. It's not a blessing for eating matzah on the subsequent days of Pesach. In contrast with Sukkot, every time you come into the sukkah, every night you come into, every day you come into the sukkah, even if you leave the sukkah to do business during the day and come back to it, the obligation is to say, I am back to the sukkah, I am back to this temporary housing, and obligated to say, Baruch Asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu le'shei b'sukkah. We are obligated to say the blessing of acknowledgement of thanks for coming into the sukkah every day of the sukkah, of the holiday of Sukkot, even though only the obligation to eat a meal in the sukkah is the first night, which raises the question about what happens if it rains, but we'll deal with that. On. Last issue in the Mishnah of Sukkot is all 7 days a person must make the sukkah his permanent residence and his house his temporary residence. Which means that you take whatever you need out of your permanent house and you make your permanent house this paradox. You make your permanent house the temporary house that you've set up as your dwelling place for the next 7 days. And one is obligated, according to the Talmud, then to bring in the finest of one's materials and to decorate it and to make it comfortable. It's not like you're going camping. This is going to be the place that you're going to live in for the 7 days of the holiday. Your permanent house is your temporary house. And that whole anomaly becomes crucial in terms of how we understand the message of Sukkot and one's place in the universe. The question of raining on Sukkot. What happens if it rains on Sukkot? What do you do if it's raining on Sukkot? During the course of the week, because we're Jewish, okay, and we're not Narim, or not Narim. That was my Yiddish. Sorry. If it's raining on Sukkot, what do? Chochem, get out of the rain. You're not required to stay in the sukkah if it's raining and it's uncomfortable. Now, what do you do with Mishnah number 6, 2:6, that says you have to eat at least one meal in the sukkah? And this is on the first day of Sukkot, on the first night. If it's raining, you are required to go into the sukkah, recite the Kiddush, do Hamotzi, and after you've done, and say the bracha of Leishei Sukkah, and then go into your house. You're not obligated to complete a full meal in the sukkah if it is raining on the first day of Sukkot, okay? Which I think is poses a problem, I think, for some people who would insist on staying in the sukkah because the mitzvah is Leishei Sukkah. How are you supposed to treat this incident where it is raining in your sukkah? It says, what can this be compared to? A slave who came to fill the cup of his master, and the master poured a pitcher over his face. Sometimes God says, I'm not happy. Go into the house. You're not going to stay in the sukkah. And you accept the gzeirah of the rain, and the sukkah has a gzeirah from God, and you go back into your house, saddened perhaps, but with the knowledge that you've had this opportunity to fulfill the mitzvah, at least the brachot and the and eating at least small portion of bread in the sukkah. So all of this, we've got a frail structure, a structure that must be frail, but a structure that is legitimate because it withstands the wind. The Kitzur Shulchan Aruch says that the sukkah must be of such a structure. It is a kosher sukkah if the candles in your sukkah are not blown out by the wind. Probably better to have 4 doors than 3 doors, but sufficient to withstand the wind, frail, subject to the wind because the schach will blow away, subject to the rains, but in a situation where you provided shade, where you provided shelter from the winds. So what position are we in? How are we feeling about all of this? And that's up for discussion as we proceed further. Thank you. Tzvika, Alecha. Hello.
Thank you.
Tzvika.
That was really fascinating, Ed. Thank you very much. So we have a few more minutes to talk and debate this. Anyone wants to comment or add something, ask something?
Yeah, I do. It always.
Rachel, you're cutting off.
Oh.
You're cutting off. Rachel, your Zoom is out.
It's Yochevet, I think.
It was Yochevet speaking?
Yeah.
Yeah, her microphone is off.
I
Now
put
it's on.
my mic, I'm now
Now
unmuted.
you're on.
Now we can hear you. Yochevet, now we
Again?
can hear you.
I bring up the question again. You have dealt with all kinds of little funny Jewish type details. We've ignored the subject that I raised before. I raise it again. And I raise it because it is not usual, not because it is usual. Sukkot follows Yom Kippurim. The end of Yom Kippur is reading Yonah. Yonah sits in a sukkah. The question is a question of sin. Sin is a very important thing of life. It is not about pushing buttons, and it's not about this size or that size, and it's not about what do you do when it rains. Sin is the thing that grips us from the beginning of our life to the end, and you simply refuse to notice it as a connection with the sukkah. So I ask you to do that now.
Next question?
I was thinking about it, Yochevet, you know, why?
It said, זה חג שמח, זה שמח, ואך רק שמח.